Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Screwed Space podcast. Today, we're joined by Chris Campbell, and what we will be discussing is the evolution of threat intelligence to cyber threat intelligence. So, what do we mean by that? Essentially, threat intelligence has been around for decades. While CTI is this relatively new concept, threat intelligence has existed long before that in sort of military and geopolitical analysis, and criminal investigations as well. So. But as the world has become a little bit more, digitally reliable, so has cyber threat intelligence, and threat intelligence has essentially moved into this cyber sphere, and therefore threat intelligence has had to evolve with it. As with anything, as with human evolution, there is also digital evolution, and there is also threat intelligence evolution, and that is what prompted the topic for today. But before we get into it, Chris, are you okay just to give the audience a little bit of a background to yourself, if that's okay?
Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. Yeah, so I'm Chris Campbell. I'm a senior cyber threat intelligence team lead at Orpheus Cyber. In the past, I've been with another managed service provider, which was called Bridewell. And prior to that, I have quite an extensive background in the military. So I was in the British Army for 8 years, and I left in 2023 as a threat intelligence team leader. So, overall, I guess the golden thread over the past 10 years or so has been, threat intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see that these podcasts aren't pieced together. You can see that obviously Chris has done threat intelligence and then has now moved in CTI, and therefore we are in very, very capable hands to kind of discuss the differences between the two. So, Chris, tell us a little bit more about your role in the army as threat intelligence then, because you said that it's not necessarily CTI that you're doing; it was just threat intelligence. But I'm sure there was a bit of a blend of the both. So, tell me all about your time in the army.
Yeah, so I joined the intelligence corps in 2015 and I spent 8 years there and I left in 2023. So essentially, within those 8 years, I was probably deployed for around 2 years of that time um, on quite sensitive operations. And I guess the crux of it is it was really about providing intelligence support to quite senior stakeholders for varying operations.
Yep.
A lot of that was based on geopolitics, open source intelligence, and human intelligence. So those were the three biggest ones, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, with that being said, then, when it came to the end of your time serving, then, what did you actually have in your mind then? What was your plan when you was looking to leave the army? Did you say it was in 2023 when you left then?
Yeah, so I left in December 22, but officially left around February of 23. And I guess at the point of my notice to terminate, essentially, I had a couple of things in mind.
Yep.
Cybersecurity was really the number one choice, to be fair. I've seen a lot of former colleagues within the army leave and transition to cybersecurity and CTI. So for me, it seemed like a natural pivot, to be fair.
Yeah.
I think going from threat intelligence to CTI, there's a lot of crossover. So in regards to the intelligence lifecycle, intelligence principles, adding context to incidents, analyzing those incidents, and providing so what's to the stakeholders. So for me, yeah, it was a natural pivot. Don't get me wrong, there has been, a massive learning curve,
Yep.
especially in the sort of initial 12 months or so, having been in the job.
Yep.
But that's expected, I would say, for pretty much everyone leaving the military. So
Yeah.
yeah, but I guess that's a bit about that.
Absolutely. And I suppose let's start this as a helicopter overview, and then let's get more granular throughout the next half an hour. Just Chris, if you could, in your own words, kind of define what actually is threat intelligence, and then define what is CTI, and then we can start sort of drawing the links between the two. Then, because you say
Yes,
there was obviously a lot of similarities between the both. I'd just like to sort of set up our stall essentially before we move forward.
yeah. So you touched on it at the start, so the concept of threat intelligence has existed for many years, hundreds of years, let's say, both through the military and through geopolitical context. However, cyber threat intelligence is a dedicated field, which I would say emerged around perhaps the World War II, Cold War era.
Okay.
However, it has been it has become a lot more popular, I would say around 2004.
Okay.
And that's with the release of quite a major report from Mandiant on APT1. So they were really the first company really to bring CTI to the forefront.
Yep.
And from there it's really just evolved and evolved over the past 20 years.
And elaborate a bit on that report. What actually was it?
So it was essentially a deep dive, a real deep dive into a Chinese nation state threat actor.
Mm,
And at the time, most people didn't really have an understanding of how these nation state groups operate,
yeah.
including, myself. So regardless if it's a Chinese nation state actor or Russian, North Korean, Iranian, um, there's some really good snippets in that report, really comprehensive of how they gain initial access, how they escalate privileges,
Yep.
what their actions on objective are.
Yep.
And more importantly, there's quite a good section on attribution as well. So, who actually are these individuals? Where do they reside? What are their links to the government, for example? So that report, which was re which was released in 2004, I want to say,
Yep.
really became the backbone and catalyst for a lot of activity and reports following on from that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I've never heard of that before. So that's actually really insightful, Chris. Um, so where I wanted to kind of go to next then is the principles around the two of TI and CTI then. So could I be as naive as thinking that literally your mindset as when you were in the Inc Corps in the army of like doing your research, doing your profiling, thinking two steps ahead, having your like sort of your protocols and your playbooks in place to gather your information. Is it all sort of the same, but literally you're doing it on a computer and looking for digital adversaries as opposed to physical adversaries? Is it as naive as that, or is it a little bit bigger picture than that, Chris?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So when I was in the military, I was looking at certain terrorist groups. They would have certain weapon systems,
Yep,
AK-47s, for example. Transitioning to CTI, instead of looking at terrorist groups,
yep,
we're now looking at organized criminal groups.
yep, yep.
So hackers on keyboards, essentially. So there are obviously real key similarities between those two different actors.
Yeah,
And that's kind of the same with the weapon systems as well.
yeah.
So
It's kind of like
instead
the
of at
PTPs, isn't
your
it? A bit.
yeah, exactly. So instead of looking at your AK-47s or your RPGs, we're now looking at
Yep,
different malware variants, different ransomware types. Um, so there is a lot of similarity there.
yep, yep,
And going back one as well with the intelligence cycle, it's pretty much the exact same as well. So there's a lot of value to be made from ex-military intelligence trained personnel
yep.
pivoting to CTI.
And so, in the teams that you've worked with since leaving the military, in terms of Bridewell and Orpheus, um, the sort of fellow analysts that you've worked with, is it more of an advantage then if you've come from a threat intelligence background, i.e., also military, as opposed to coming up maybe through the SOC background or coming up through the university background? What's your sort of experience with your fellow peers?
Yeah, no, it really depends on the analyst, to be fair. Certainly as ex-army, we've got really good grasps of the cycle principles, etc. And that's all really important. That is, the backbone and the bread and butter of what we do in CTI. However, there is a large area of CTI, the tactical and technical space, where you find a lot of perhaps members of the SOC, so Security Operations Center,
Yeah,
have really great tactical and technical knowledge. And those things combined as a team
Yep.
can really, make things strong. So I would say, um, yeah, it's really important, I would say, to really dig into the tactical and technical side of things to really be the best analyst that
Yeah.
you can be, you know. So it's not certainly not a perfect background
Yep.
because it takes time to build that knowledge. But once you have that knowledge, it's great, I would say.
Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? It's I'd say that to work in CTI, you've kind of got to have the strategic, the tactical, and the technical as well. Because, like you say, you've got to be able to understand why these attacks are happening, haven't you? You've got to understand the motivations behind it, the bigger picture, the geopolitical landscape. Why is this attack actually happening on our business here in the UK? Well, it's a boardroom decision that happened halfway across the world that impacted this, and it's not just putting out the fire and escalating it to the IR team or escalating it to the SOC. It is that next level, which, like you say, being in the military does allow you to actually understand that a little bit more. You would say. I'm not saying that people out of university aren't aware of what's going on in the world. Hell, I haven't been in the military. I came up through the university route, so I feel like I can say this because I've come from that route. But you know what I mean with that, Chris. So it's very much a holistic blend. Is always going to be the best outcome if I had to sit nicely on the fence there. Um, so we've always said that there is a lot of similarities between threat intelligence and CTI. What's been the main differences that you found in the last couple of years then, Chris?
Um, Probably going back again to the tactical side of things, you know. Having a real firm grasp of ransomware, for example, at both a macro level and a micro level, is really important. So macro level, who are the big groups?
Yeah,
What are the targeting rationale? Why do they do what they do? But at the micro level, it's more about the attack chain, TTPs, IOCs, hash values, etc. So it's really, I would say, the biggest change is really getting into the weeds and the details
yeah,
of certain events and incidents. And
yeah,
I think that's where the blend of tactical and operational knowledge really complements very well with that sort of military and strategic knowledge. So
yeah,
being able to bring out the so what, like you said, understanding why something is happening,
yeah,
it is going to provide a lot more value in the long run
yeah,
compared to just going through tickets and going through RFIs.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. That is a key difference. And how have you sort of found the level of intelligence in terms of what you're gathering between the two worlds? Because as I know in sort of CTI, there is so much noise out there. The internet is a vast space, and there's so many parallels you can draw between it. In threat intelligence in the real world, it's the world you're looking at. Threat intelligence in cyber world, it is the internet that you're looking at. So it's two massively global sort of parallels, isn't it? And I'm just curious as to what your thought is in terms of the get changing information into intelligence and how you actually separate what is noise and what is okay, this is a problem or we need to act on it. Because I suppose in threat intelligence in the army, it's a lot of it is human, whereas obviously in sort of cyber, a lot of it can be sort of OSINT, or even sort of beyond that in terms of actually gathering it through deep dark web forums, etc. So yeah, how have you sort of distinguished separating the noise from what is actually sort of actionable right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And to be fair, that's a conversation I have with my clients on a regular basis.
Yeah,
Um, so, as everyone is aware, in CTI within the threat landscape, it is incredibly vast. There is a lot of noise. You can scroll through LinkedIn, Reddit, Feedly, and you'll come across a bunch of vulnerabilities that have been exploited in the wild. You know, social engineering attempts, different groups popping up here and there. Um, but what is relevant to our clients or to our company? That really comes down to PIRs, so priority intelligence requirements. This is really one of the main things you want to really set in stone before we actually go into the collection phase. So with these PIRs, they're more they're really about questions that are of real interest and would have an impact on our clients. So, for example, who are the ransomware operators operating within the financial sector over the past 90 days, for
Yeah,
example. It needs to be somewhat granular. It can't be too high level.
yeah,
And with these PIRs, that really lessens the noise
yeah,
because it gives us a focus. And with that focus, we can then produce our intelligence collection plan.
yeah,
And that's really the bread and butter of the collection phase. So if you have those two things in place, like any sort of mature CTI function should have, then it's a lot less overwhelming
yeah,
for the analysis team. So that's probably the key differentiator, I would say.
yeah,
And I guess going on from that, like I mentioned at the start, we've got a noisy environment. There's a lot of information, data feeds, but really, a really good analyst would be able to analyze that information,
yeah.
add context to that information, and off of the back of that, produce relevant, actionable, and timely intelligence
Mm,
for stakeholders. And ultimately, that's what we're here to do. It's those three principles, in my opinion,
yeah.
is really what, what is expected within our function.
That was really well answered, Chris. And it seems like throughout a lot of your answers, you are drawing parallels to the intelligence life cycle that you mentioned at the start. And just for anyone that might not be aware of it, are you all right just to take us one step back and actually just tell us a little bit about this intelligence life cycle that you seem to, it's very apparent that you live and breathe it, to be honest with you. So can you actually sort of like talk us through what the intelligence life cycle actually is?
Yeah, so it can change a little bit depending on what vendor is pushing out that adaptation of the life cycle. But typically speaking, in the military, there are four key steps. So direction, collection, processing, and dissemination. However, I have seen in CTI that broken down further to
Okay.
the likes of direction, collection, processing, analysis, dissemination, and feedback. So a little bit more granular, but really the exact same thing. So with direction, like I mentioned, we're looking at the risk appetite of the organization. We're looking at their PIRs. That's really where we get a focus. With the collection, that's looking at our internal capabilities and understanding, we can use open source, we can use the dark web. We've got access to open and closed forums on the dark web, for example, and we can scrape information off of that. Processing is really about turning that noisy data and information into something a bit more digestible.
Yeah.
And that's where we can add context to that information and really analyze it. And that's, of course, the analysis phase.
Yeah.
And then going a step further to that, that's where we also want to provide that intelligence. So the relevant, actionable, and timely intelligence to the stakeholders, which falls on to dissemination. So ensuring that those individuals or functions receive it in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the issues with threat intelligence as a whole is that it can be difficult to capture feedback from stakeholders. It's all too often as analysts and functions where we can spend a lot of time on the report, and it almost disappears into the ether once it's sent off. It may go into a stakeholder's SharePoint, may go into the email and stay there. That's something that's inherent with the function. But I would say the caveat to that is the more rapport, the more trust we have with those stakeholders, the more feedback that we'll get. So it's really an iterative cycle, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And you obviously mentioned there that CTI puts in a couple more steps than but there is a lot of similarity between the two. Um, do you agree with those steps? Do you think that they are added for a reason due to the technical? And is it because there is technical nuances involved, or is it just adding steps because the model's outdated and it needs someone needs to be busy and add in a couple more steps. What talk to me a little bit about why the CTI model is ever so slightly different.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I over think about, to be
Yeah.
fair. I would say it's just broken down a little bit more, just to be a little bit more granular and precise, I would say. With the military one, it's kind of assumed that feedback is part of dissemination
Mm.
anyway, you know?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same with processing and analysis. That's kind of the processing stage of the military life cycle. So as much as there are differences, I do prefer the more granular cycle,
Yeah.
especially feedback tying into direction, because based off of that feedback, we can then refine our direction, we can refine our PIRs and begin their life cycle again.
Yeah. No, no, that makes perfect sense. Um, just as we enter sort of the last few minutes then, Chris, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about the wider picture of sort of CTI teams now. And I wanted to get your thoughts on if there should be a responsibility involved with cybersecurity analysts or any sort of security analyst team, not necessarily a CTI team, just to kind of actually dedicate time towards the geopolitical awareness side of it. And it's what we were talking about earlier in terms of like there's so much tactical and technical focus in terms of oh yeah we'll hire you and we'll put you through X degree and we'll give you X amount of training on this software and brilliant. But there's never a mention of the strategic side, which I just think is often overlooked with security teams. It's yes, I appreciate there is an element of self-responsibility to know what's going on with the world. But not everybody is like that, and therefore they might need it to be ingested into the teams. Do you think there's a place for it? Do you think there's companies out there that are doing that and investing that sort of awareness into their staff? What's your thoughts on what I've said there, Chris?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's geopolitics is something I looked into and researched extensively in the military, and for good reason. If you're looking at Russia, Ukraine, or China, Taiwan, you really want to have your finger on the pulse from a geopolitical perspective. I would say geopolitics is it's still important within cyber threat intelligence. It does form part of the foundations of cybersecurity, of the threat landscape. So understanding why threat actors do what they do, you know. So if that's Russia, NATO, for example, it's really important to understand at a macro level why that happens,
Yeah,
you know. And that's same with China, Taiwan, China, Southeast Asia, for example. Why does that happen? Well, it's really about political dominance in certain areas, or if it's looking at something else, it could be for, a different reason. Um, Having said that, working within CTI, certainly in my experience, is primarily looking at the tactical and operational side
okay.
of things. It's a case of really opening up tickets, understanding what that ticket is,
Yeah,
and then doing a deep dive into it for a set amount of time, regarding EDR, telemetry, or whatever it may be, you know. And that's the same with the operational side of things as well. So
yeah,
understanding what threat actors TTPs are, we're looking at phishing, voice phishing, exploited vulnerabilities, brute force, etc. Um, so I would say, generally speaking, it's a part of the threat landscape that is often overlooked
yeah,
within environments, even at large environments as well, large companies that I've worked with. It's something that's often lip service because analysts, blue teams, SOCs, they are very busy. They're very busy dealing with the closest crocodile to the canoe, for example. So these are, important factors as well.
yeah. And it's just that balance between. I totally get what you're saying. Like it's like at the end of the day, you're here to work and you're here to defend the business, and keep it operational and stop any breaches so that we don't lose any downtime and any money. That's where it all gets stripped back to. But then you've also just got to look at it on the personal side. These are the skills that will make them better managers when they move up the chain, and they will make them more well-rounded. But it's just that short-term, long-term battle that you'll always face in terms of upskilling your staff. Like you say, I don't even know how you'd train them to do it. I think there definitely would be a way. I don't know if it'd fall under security awareness. I don't know, but it's just food for thought, isn't it, as to what can kind of happen in terms of making security teams, yeah, m more well-rounded more than anything, Chris. So definitely food for thought.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's difficult for a lot of organizations, to be
Mm,
fair. Like I said, more often than not, cybersecurity as a whole is more of a cost center to a lot of these companies. It's it can be quite difficult for some functions to really demonstrate their own value
mm,
as well. So I think those are some factors at play from an overall security awareness side of things, you know.
yeah. Chris, just like that, mate, we have come to our time. So if anybody has got any questions for Chris today, or would like to just input their view on their what they perceive as the differences between threat intelligence and CTI and how the two have sort of evolved over the time, then please do get involved in the comments. But once again, Chris, thank you very much for coming on the Security Space podcast.
No, that's great, Nick. Thank you very much for having me.